mayor, and just ask you, Gabby, what new and exciting things are you involved with these days?
Well, thank you, Shelley. We're so happy to have everyone here for our 7th Everyone's Welcome episode with Dr. Stephen Shore. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gabrielle Kaplan-Mayer, and at Jewish Learning Venture here in the greater Philadelphia area, I'm the Chief Program Officer, and I oversee our whole community inclusion initiative, which works on creating disability awareness across the greater Jewish community. And we are looking forward to a great year. It's going to be a different year, of course, because of doing our programming primarily in a virtual way. But we are committed to, keep doing our work, and we're excited. In some ways, we're reaching more people by doing more things virtually. So, Shelley, how about you?
Well, I've been quite busy with the high holidays, and I've written a high holiday guide that'll be available next week in partnership with the Ruderman Synagogue Inclusion Project in Boston. And it's all based on what's going to be different and how to support people with any sort of diagnosis or disability and family members, and what we can do, what synagogues can do to ensure that people feel that sense of connection and welcome. And I think that the audience is almost, or the people that it's aimed at are really broader than ever before, because so many people are experiencing isolation and distancing. So it really was, I like to say it was like almost like writing science fiction or fiction, because I had to imagine so many different scenarios and different things that could connect people. So I'm excited for that to come out. And I don't know if anyone knows this, I'm the kind of the mother of JDAME these days. I'm the parent of Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. And I travel a great deal in February. This year, of course, I'm not traveling. So I'm working with a lot of communities and synagogues to line some work up to talk to their congregations about inclusion and belonging and so forth. So again, very exciting. And I look forward, and I think all of us have this opportunity. I'm sure as you meet Stephen, you'll hear too about different opportunities that we have to reach people in a new way. And when all of us reach out to other people, that means we're able to bring more people into this tent of belonging and inclusion. So I'm really excited though to introduce Stephen Shore, one of my favorites of all time. We don't see each other nearly enough, but I want to introduce you to Stephen. He was diagnosed with atypical development and strong autistic tendencies and too sick for outpatient treatment. And he was recommended for institutionalization. Non-speaking until 4 years old, and with much support from his parents, teachers, wife, and others, Stephen is now a full-time professor at Adelphi University and adjunct at NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, focusing on aligning best practice in supporting autistic people to lead fulfilling and productive lives. In addition to working with children and talking about life on the autism spectrum, Stephen is an internationally renowned educator, consultant, and author on lifespan issues pertinent to education, relationships, employment, and self-advocacy. His most recent book combines personal stories and research for promoting success in higher education. Stephen is a current board member of Autism Speaks and the Organization for Autism Research, OAR, President Emeritus of the Asperger's Autism Network, and advisory board member of the Autism Society. He is involved in an advisory role with other organizations. And Stephen, it is our privilege and our honor to welcome you to Everyone's Welcome.
Yes, Stephen, thank you so much for being here tonight. We are really thrilled to have you, and Thank you to all of our participants who are here to learn with us and hear Stephen's story. And a shout out to my friend and colleague, Alana Raffel, who's here with us typing captions. Alana, we really appreciate it. Stephen, I'm wondering if we can begin just with you talking to us about your life with autism. Can you tell us your story?
Yeah, certainly be glad to. Taking it from the beginning, things were pretty typical at first. And then at 18 months, like what happens to about 30% of us on the autism spectrum, I was struck with the regressive autism bar. And I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment, and in brief, I became a pretty autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism, so little known that it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis. And when they did, the doctor said, well, you know, this kid is just too sick. You send him off to an institution. Well, fortunately, my parents, Baruch Hashem, they had the wisdom to advocate on my behalf like we see so many parents doing today. And they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program that emphasized music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. So it probably looked like one of the more play-based approaches that we see today, such as floor time or Miller method or RDI. And with the work that my parents did, speech began to return at age 4. I got reevaluated by that school. I started going there. And instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. So things were looking better. Age 4 is where I had my first highly focused interest. Autistic people tend to have highly focused interests. My first one was watches. I was found by my parents taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, take out some of the gears, spin them around, play with them, and put it all back together again, and the watch still worked. And there weren't any pieces left over. So what is really interesting to me is how could I have the fine motor control to take apart a watch, but I was such a disaster when it came to penmanship. So many of us autistic people, for reasons of motor control, are just penmanship disaster areas. One of the worst experiences I could have in school, other than bullying, would be to walk into a classroom with a paragraph on the board. Because what that would mean, as it means to so many elementary school children, is that you're going to have to copy it down. So by the end of class, everybody had finished and gone to recess, and I had only gotten through a couple of words. Well, then it was on to, so anyways, back to with my parents after discovering this watch in pieces and getting back together again, still working. Soon they provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and to put back together again. So they were really focusing on my strengths. They focused on what I could do. And that's an important thing that we need to consider, is that when we look at people who are autistic, when we look at people who have various other differences, we need to be asking, what can the person do? And then certainly there are challenges. If they weren't, we wouldn't be here trying to figure these things out with autism and other conditions. However, we look at these challenges as barriers, and barriers that we need to tear down so that that person can lead as fulfilling and productive life as possible. So the person on the spectrum who doesn't speak, they may not have the neurology to speak. There comes a time when we have to say, all right, enough with this trying to get the person to speak. Let's find them another way of communication. And often that's with an assistive communication device. And I know many autistic people who don't speak, but once you get them on one of these devices, they can communicate just as well as the rest of us, maybe even better. So anyways, back to my situation. Age 6, I entered regular school kindergarten. I was a social and academic catastrophe. You know what happens to people who are different in grade school. Fortunately, school systems have begun to realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through. Grade-wise, I was about a grade, academically, I was about a grade behind in most of my subjects. I'd spend most of my time in elementary school getting all the books on my favorite subjects, reading them, taking notes, copying diagrams. And then when that highly focused interest, whether it was astronomy or electricity, aviation, earthquakes, volcanoes, whatever it was, they'd all get returned, and then I'd find something else to be interested in. I remember in 3rd grade, I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk, and a teacher told me that I'd never learn how to do math. But somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the university level. Now, unfortunately, this special interest in astronomy in this case, and find a way to teach math through the interest. So that's a nice development that I've seen. So moving on to middle and high school. You don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school. But for me, it was actually better because number one, I figured out that using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. Music being another highly focused interest of mine, I joined the band. Now I had a structured activity in which to mediate my interactions with others. I got so fascinated with music that I got it into my autistic head that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments. So I'd go into the instrument closet, spend hours in there, figuring out how the instruments worked, taking them apart, sometimes recombining 2 or 3 instruments into contraptions that never should have seen the light of day. And then when I heard that one of the requirements for a degree in music education was that you had to know all the instruments, and there were actually classes in learning all these instruments, well, that just seemed to be the way to go. In middle and high school, that's also bar mitzvah time. And we tried the usual route of teaching me to read Hebrew, and it wasn't going well at all. And then my parents, again, taking a strength-based approach, asking what I can do, and thinking about the characteristic of autism, of echolalia, and working with that concept, they got the idea that they should record one of the cantors singing the entire first 3 days, and the Haftorah, and all the prayers that go along with being bar mitzvah. And I listened to them on a tape recorder over and over, and soon I had it down, completely down, in one big echolalia session. And that was a lot of fun. And I enjoyed doing that. And so onward to college. College was a utopia. I had more friends. If I wanted to ride my bicycle at midnight, I could find someone just as strange as I was to also ride at midnight. So bachelor's in music, a master's in music, all of a doctoral coursework in music. And then after I'd finished all of that coursework and it was starting to be time to think about dissertation, I got more interested, started getting more interested in autism. So I defected to the School of Special Education and got my degree in that. By then I had already written a couple of books, 3 to be exact, until my advisor said, stop writing books and finish your dissertation, so I did. And that was in February of 2008. And by January of 2009, I was at Adelphi University as a professor of special education. And now I spend my time either teaching or researching at my university, and now with the COVID-19 pandemic, virtually at the university, because actually I'm at home, in Boston. Courses, research mostly related to autism. Before the pandemic, I was traveling to a different country about once a month to talk about autism. So a lot of conferences, 51 countries to be exact. Israel 3 times, including speaking to the soldiers, autistic soldiers in the IDF, about self-advocacy and various other things. And also giving music lessons to children on the autism spectrum. And now I'm here talking to you about autism.
We're so glad you are.
Thanks.
I have to ask you, by the way, when I was in college, I had a highly focused interest in astronomy as well. And I was one of 5 people who got an A out of like 800 people. That was the highlight of my baccalaureate years.
Oh,
what can I say? You were talking about music. I'm going to just insert this question, and then we'll come back to the messages that you give when you're speaking. But I know for a fact that Tumbalalaika, that beautiful, beautiful folk tune, is one of your favorites, maybe your favorite. I recall a time when I met you at the airport in Minneapolis, and we were walking to get something to drink, and there was the grand piano, and you sat down at the grand piano and played Tumbalalaika to everyone's delight. Can you tell us your connection?
Oh, sure. So now I've just changed my background to medieval music. This is Tumbalalaika in medieval music notation. Actually, no, I'm just joking. It isn't. But anyways, Tumbalalaika. I've known that piece of music since I was a very young child, maybe since about age 4, that I became aware of what it was. It was one of the many pieces of music that my parents would play as part of what we today call early intervention, where we'd move to music, sing to music, do all kinds of things to music. And music was generally on all day and all night. So that was my first exposure to it. At a later point, I was, in a previous life, I was a professor of music at a college in the Boston area. And that's when I could really get into my perseveration on the piece. We performed the piece, I directed a choir, and we performed it, I think 3 times. We performed it in Yiddish, we performed it in English, and then I discovered that Nana Mascari took that very same melody and put her own words to it. So we sang those words too. And so that at least it gave me a lot of fun and pleasure. I don't know about my chorus, but they got through it too.
So great.
So that is my interest in Tumbalalaika.
So you have traveled to 51 countries. It's just mind-boggling in a way. And we're really interested in knowing about the important messages that you share with your international audiences. And are they the same as you share with your North American audiences?
The message is the same. And one thing that I talk about is what I call the 4 A's autism, which is a developmental way of how we think about autism. And the first A beginning with awareness. We've been aware of autism for a long time, for the past generation. Organizations such as Autism Speaks, Autism Society of America, and various other organizations that we, yeah, I'm getting an emergency call from my wife. Can I step out for a moment and come right back?
You sure can. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
absolutely. Well, this is a first.
I know, Shelley.
Love it.
We could actually, if you want, go to the slideshow and take a moment just to talk about what's coming up while we're waiting for Stephen.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Flexibility is the name of the game.
You got that right. Thanks for playing, everybody.
Yeah. So for those of us in the Jewish community, here we are in the middle of August, and we know that the high holidays in our calendar are going to be coming up in about a month. So at the end of August, or possibly that first week in September, we're going to do our next conversation thinking about high holidays in this age of Zoom and social distancing, and how important it is to think about an inclusive lens and making sure that everyone feels a part of things in this time when we're all struggling with maybe not belonging.
And this, we want you to know, first of all, this is our contact information on our websites. On the screen, we'll hold it up there for a little bit. All of our past conversations now have a home on www.jkidaccess.org, and you can go there and find all of our recordings and so forth. And we have an announcement. We're going to do the announcement now. So
let's go for it. So
okay, I'm back.
Oh, Stephen,
okay.
Oh, Shelley, we're saving the announcement till the end.
I love it.
We just created some suspense.
Oh, all right. Oh, that's
First of all, is everything okay?
yeah, the washing machine was unbalanced, and you know what kind of horrible noises a washing machine.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had to fix that, and I guess we're good for a while anyways.
So you were talking about the 4 A's of autism and the messages that you share with your audiences.
Right, so first A, awareness. We've become aware of autism, whether it's in education, whether it's in our synagogues or other places of worship. We become aware of autism when it's at home, or in the community, or in employment. And even many autistic people discovering that they're autistic themselves after they start wondering why things are the way they are and start reading about it, and then getting their suspicions confirmed by an official diagnosis. We've gotten to the point where autism has gone from being considered a very rare psychiatric disorder caused by poor mothering, happening in 1 in 10,000, to now a prevalence rate of 1 in 54. So what I tell educators is that if you don't have an autistic child in your classroom this time, the numbers will catch up with you and you'll have one next time. That builds a nice solid foundation for acceptance of those autistic characteristics. And what that means is that these autistic characteristics, they're here to stay. We can't early interventionize them out of someone. But we can't work against them, but we can work with them. So an example might be working against. You have a kid who is having difficulties with math. And at the same time, they've got this highly specialized interest, a deep interest in using a flight simulator on the computer. And one way of, say, working against the characteristic is saying, this special interest it gets in the way, we got to get rid of it so that we have the room to teach the child. So we're going to consider this as a powerful reinforcer, and if the child does what they're supposed to do in math class for 20 minutes, then they get 10 minutes on the flight simulator. And that should motivate the child to pay attention in math. Or we can work with the characteristic, and we could find ways to teach math through using the flight simulator. So that's an example of working with the characteristics of autism. The next step is appreciation. And that's where we see autistic people being valued for what we can contribute to society. And we're seeing this happen in some of the larger software companies, such as Microsoft, SAP, Apple, Google, and so on. These companies actively seeking autistic individuals because they know we can do certain things better and faster than most other people. And it helps the company run better. We've seen the IDF actively seek autistic soldiers because they know a certain number of us have a particular visual acuity and can see things faster and better than most other people can. So whenever I think about these companies, these geeky companies hiring autistic people, my question always is, well, what about everybody else? Because only a minority of us are computer geeks. So that's another myth of autism, that we're all computer geeks. So many of us have skills in other areas. And also many of us may have more significant needs. They may need more supports, but there's still fulfilling and productive employment for them as well. So for example, I know an individual in Florida. He loves to do nothing more than fold hot laundry fresh out of a dryer. I know many people who would like help with their laundry, and he'd be happy to help you too. But you have to pay him to do it because that's his job. He gets paid to do it. He does it all day. He's fulfilled, and he's appreciated for what he can contribute. And then there's the fourth step, which is action. And action is the glue that puts these three steps together. And it's the glue that helps us work with the autistic characteristics of an individual and find ways for that person to lead fulfilling and productive lives. So that's a common message that I think translates around the world.
Stephen, thank you so much for taking us through that. We actually wanted to move towards something a little bit more personal, which is, that for many people today, both with or without any kind of diagnosis, spirituality and faith are important in achieving a quality of life. Belonging and being valued and making connections to a religious community are such an important part of well-being. And I'm wondering if you can share how your spirituality and faith play a role in your life.
Oh yeah, certainly. Well, back as a young child, we would go to temple every Sunday. I mean, it was okay. It wasn't that great, but you just kind of did it. Then, as I mentioned, we got through my bar mitzvah. And like for so many people, you do your bar mitzvah, and then you don't set foot in the temple ever again. And then many years later, after I started teaching at Adelphi University in New York, it was getting to be the high holidays. And so I thought, well, let's see if there's a temple in the area, and maybe I'll go. And I found there was one less than a mile away. I went. I was welcomed, and that's a great, great title for today's talk. The word welcome. And I was made to feel very welcome in what looked like a very orthodox shul. Well, I guess it is an orthodox shul. The rabbi noticed me right away. Out of say 300 people, the temple was packed, and he even called me up for an aliyah. And he invited me to sit in the cheap seats. Ones right in the front that nobody wants to sit in. So I spent all day there, and I thought it was great. The rabbi was very friendly. He invited me to dinner at his house. I kept going. It seemed to be a pretty cool thing to do. As time went on, I found out that he is a Chabad rabbi, which then got me involved in the entire Chabad movement. And I think they're doing some really great things when it comes to welcoming. They are really good about turning outwards. Often I see a lot of religious organizations, including Jewish organizations, they're kind of insular. You almost get the effect of, well, if you hadn't been a member of this temple for the past 100 years, then you're an outsider. But what I found in everyone involved in Chabad. And it's like you remember once you walked into the temple. And then you get down to the details of paying dues and whatever types of other things you do as a typical member. But you're a member no matter where you are. And as a matter of fact, now when I was traveling, I used to engage in what I call Chabad surfing, where wherever I went, if it was over a Shabbat, then I would find the local Chabad, and it might be in another state in the United States, or it could be as far away as Thailand, India. I've been to more Chabads than anybody else I know, and I found the organization to be very supportive and very welcoming, to the point where I'm now the faculty advisor for the Chabad on campus at Adelphi University. And the rabbi there, Rabbi Yanko Litzker, is doing a great job of building a community for Jewish students at Adelphi University, which, by the way, that is the background that you see now. The campus, which is very empty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But anyways, here it is. And in the background, you see a panther, who is the mascot.
Cool. Thank you, Stephen.
Go Panthers. You know, there's the beautiful Hasidic rendition of the synagogue, the Orthodox synagogue.
Oh yeah. Western Wall.
Behind you. Yeah, yeah. We had a lovely Shabbat dinner in Milwaukee at one of the rabbi's homes.
Yeah, we certainly
And
did. Yeah.
Just felt so welcome. It's
Yeah.
really nice. So this is a question we ask all of our guests. And this is that. What advice do you have, Stephen, for faith communities to welcome and support people, autistic people, people with other conditions throughout the lifespan? So say from baby to Zadie, perhaps.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Well, from baby to Zadie, and I know autistic people who are babies, and all the way to Zadies, boobies is too. Don't forget the boobies.
Yes.
They can be autistic too. And I think the best thing that can be done is to get to know people with differences. So get to know autistic people in your community. Get to know people with various other differences. They may be mobility impairments, they may be cognitive differences, and to be accepting. Getting to that second thing. First becoming aware and then accepting those differences. And I remember reading a story of a rabbi, it was a long time ago, it's in one of the Chabad books. And there was some very solemn praying going on. It was probably one of the high holidays. And during this very solemn and quiet praying, there was one young person with a disability who was vocalizing, making a lot of noise. And many people would say that this person's being disruptive. And somebody called out to the rabbi and said, this person's being really disruptive. I think they need to leave. And the rabbi's response was, this person is praying to God in a very pure way, in the best way they know how. Everybody is welcome.
Stephen, thank you so much. This conversation has been so rich, and even for those of us who might feel like we know a lot about autism, you've given us so many things to think about, and your story and your perspective. So we always take some time to invite our participants. If you have a question for Stephen, if you want to go ahead now and put that in the chat box. We'll take a few more minutes for any questions that you might have. Shelley, while we're waiting, should we share the announcement?
Yes, let's do that. I'll share. Well, I don't need to share my screen.
Well, some of you have been with us since we started. Everyone's welcome. Some of you are new tonight. This is our 7th conversation. And so in addition to putting up all the recordings of these episodes on YouTube, we're going to be downloading the audio into a podcast format. So look for, if you're a podcast listener like me, I know I listen a lot while I'm doing my household chores or walking my dog. You can re-listen to any episodes that you've missed, and it'll be on Apple and Spotify and all the ways that you might listen to podcasts, and share with your friends and with your community. So we're really excited for that. So I'm going to just invite you one more time. Stephen, we'll see if we have any questions. You might have been so thorough that we might not have any lingering questions, but we'll just give it a minute to see. I have one, and this is from Jennifer. Jennifer, I'm so glad you're here tonight. Do you have any observations or insights about the impact of, I think you meant to write COVID, on families and their family members with autism? And I think this whole situation of,
Right.
you know, quarantine and being at home.
Yeah, well, there are 3 things that come to mind in supporting autistic individuals, supporting parents and others who care for autistic individuals. And the first thing that comes to mind is maintaining a schedule. And that is keeping the schedule the same as much as possible. And of course, there's going to be changes. So what can we do with those changes, but still make them as similar to what they were before? So let's take an example of, we have an autistic child who has limited speaking ability. And they've got their schedule. They get up in the morning, they do all those morning routines, they have breakfast, and then they wait for the bus to pick them up at 8:30 to go to school. And all of that's represented with picture word schedules around the house so that that person knows what they need to do. Now it's time, now schooling is being done at home. So we keep the schedule as it is, right up till that 8:30 time when it's time to go out and wait for the bus, or however you get to school, and you replace that part of the schedule with, say, a picture of a desk that's dedicated to learning. It might be in a specific room in the house, it might be in a corner of the house, but wherever it is, that's where learning takes place. And at 8:30, we walk over to that desk, and we engage in school. We engage in schoolwork. Now, class tends to usually begins, I should say the school day usually begins with some sort of opening circle. So could the family get together in a circle and just recognize that everybody is there? Many schools, for example, as they call out student names, they may have a picture of all the students Velcro to a large poster of a home. And as each person is recognized, is Shelley here? Shelley is here. Shelley takes her picture, pulls it off of the big poster of home. You get a nice ripping sound with the Velcro, and she walks over to the big poster of school and sticks it onto school and then goes back to her desk. So now these posters are at home. And the poster is a picture of, let's say, the den, where the person waits until it's 8:30. And then a second picture of the desk where schooling takes place. And then there's the usual school schedule. There'll be a snack in the middle of the day, a lunch, and then it's time to go home. And in fact, everybody would do well to be mindful of their schedule, especially those of us who are now working at home. And there's also the need to have boundaries between work time and home time. And that happens naturally as one commutes between work and home. But when work is just a few steps away, if you're working from home, you need to be mindful of those boundaries. The second thing that comes to mind is communication. It's important to communicate in the best way that person with autism, with any disability, communicates. And for some, it may be a picture schedule, it may be a picture word schedule, perhaps there's an assistive communication device involved, maybe there's a letterboard that they point out. Whatever it is, just keep using those means of communication. And if a parent is not quite sure how to use these devices, or even too sure of the schedule at school, get in touch with the child's teacher. And then there's the third part, which is self-care. You need to have the strength to support somebody else. And just like in the bad old days when we were flying in airplanes, and there'd be that safety announcement, put your own oxygen mask on first before somebody else's, because otherwise you might pass out and you won't be able to help somebody else. Likewise, you've got to take care of yourself, sometimes even some very simple 1-minute breaks, such as taking a nice deep breath in. You think of inhaling calm from the environment, inhaling calm, drawing strength from Hashem, and then you're exhaling tension out of your body. You only need to do that 3 or 4 times and you're going to be relaxed. Or you can even, when you take a breath in, you make a fist, kind of like this. And when you breathe out, you open your hand. There's some very simple, like 1-minute techniques that you can use to calm yourself down. And this is also something that you can teach an autistic person to calm themselves down. So those are the big 3 that come to mind when I think about actually anybody who's been changed by the pandemic.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for answering that question. It was definitely on everyone's minds, especially as we're going into the fall with school starting back up and families thinking about what supports do I need to get through it. So important. So Shelley has up a slide with our books. You can see my book, The Little Gatecrasher, and Shelley's book, From Longing to Belonging. And while you're on your favorite bookseller, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, be sure to look for Dr. Stephen Shore's books, because if you have, are just feeling so excited and thankful for the teaching he shared with us tonight, lots more in his amazing books. So everyone who's been here, who's registered, we'll send you the announcement when tonight's episode is up on YouTube.